I shall. Okay, we're in progress with the recording.
We are in progress indeed, Nick. Indeed. So this is the first of what I hope will be many
Yeah,
little, I don't know, podcasts.
snippets.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think so. Sort of an insight because so often we see a lack of collaboration between
yeah,
the different aspects of hoof care. I come predominantly from a farriery starting point, and perhaps you'd like to tell the listeners, or we should call it the listener,
the listener.
the
If we're
listener,
lucky, if we're lucky.
because
Well, but
everyone goes. So
yeah,
just give us a bit about your background and how you started off in this weird world of hoof care.
yeah. Okay. Well, one thing I'll say just before we do that is that we're doing this live. We're not editing anything,
Oh,
so it's as you see it. That's how
yeah,
we are. We're
yeah,
both of us. Okay.
yeah.
So well, I started off with shoeing. I had my horses shod and everything else, and then I found the horses' feet were collapsing. So I sought help from people, alternative farriers, let's say, and I persuaded them to actually come up to the north of Scotland and train me to shoe because I couldn't find anyone who would do the same job as I found this guy was going to do for me. So he said, "No, we're not going to fly up and down from London not all the time. We're going to train you, take you to America and do that, and train you up in the north of Scotland, in the Highlands of Scotland, because it was legal then, and that's what we did." And amongst some of them farriers, as it progressed, one was Mark Johnson, who's very much pro barefoot as well, and he's all in that mid camp, but he's trying to make big changes as well. Um, and I then anyway, I found that when I did the shoeing and did the Cytec thing and 4-point shoeing, and it still wasn't working for me. And for the horses that were in my charge, they got better and they were okay. But I know I read Jamie Jackson's book, and I thought, wait, this actually resonates with me. So I'm going to drop everything, stop my shoeing business, and I'm just going to fly to America, go and chat with him, knock on his door, and ask him if he's a bullshitter or not. He invited me in. That's why I actually asked him when he opened the door. I'm here to see if you're a bullshitter or not. So then he opened it. I just flew on over to California. I'm thinking, was that a wise decision? I don't know. That's how I am. So that's what we did. And he invited me in and we had a cup of coffee and I saw oranges growing in his back garden. So anyway, long story short, I hooked up with him, went through what natural hoof care was and where he came from and everything else. So I'd obviously read his book. And then I thought, this resonates. So I'm going to go back to Scotland. I'm going to take all the shoes off my horses and they're going to all be barefoot. That was the biggest learning curve straight away. I took the shoes off of my horse, Daisy, and she lunged around and she immediately fell over flat on her face. And I thought she got up, shook her head, looked at me, and said, "You fucking idiot." And I thought, you pinned me right. I was really stupid then. I got too enthusiastic about it and didn't think about all the other things around. So anyway, I went down this whole big long rabbit hole, if you like, and came out the other side of it. I had a lot of stick from the traditional farriers that I knew and horse owners who say, "Oh, you've got to put shoes on." I said, "No, I'm not doing that anymore. I can't. It doesn't sit well with me." Right now, that doesn't mean to say I don't have respect for anyone else that works under a horse. Doesn't matter who you are. You work under a horse. You have my respect. Whether I agree with you or not doesn't matter. You have my respect. Now, then I went around the rest of the world, around Africa, Israel, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, around America, and did clinics and just traveled around and got a huge lot of feedback of different things going on in different countries, how it all worked. And you know what? All the problems are pretty much the same.
Yep.
The causes are slightly different, but it's all much the same. And I know you've traveled a huge amount as well, Jeff. And you must come across the same questions, and you think, "Oh, I've heard that, yeah." And you think, and everyone, "Oh, my horse is special," or this circumstance is special. And you think, actually, no, it's fundamentals, the principles of it all is horses need to be horses. They need to have what they need to do to stay fit from birth right the way through. So it's about management and everything else. And I'm speaking to you as if you don't know. And of course, you know all this. Um, and you've seen it from your start off as well. We all know when bosses kick the doors to bits, trying to loosen the nails off, trying to put the hooves through sheep netting, pulling the shoes off. All these things are telling you, you get a little bit of nail bind. It isn't because it's bad farrier, it's because the walls are getting thinner and thinner and you're stuck. So what alternatives can we give people? Because we all have our principles and things how we want to work with, but we have to provide answers. Boots, we know have come a long way, and some of them are spectacular. But some horses just they've got too much force coming down, and they spin some of these boots, even the best of the boots sometimes. And some horses like a softer boot, some like that harder boot. A bit like women going shopping. Not being sexist here, but it's true. You send them to they go off to the shop and off they go, and they look brilliant. So try them on. And go, no, that's not for me. And horses are the same. Every time we put something extra on the hoof, we affect the balance, we affect the weight, so the flight of the hoof, the landing, the loading, everything changes. If we trim too much or too little, we do the same thing. So if you're involved with hoof care, every little thing that you do, you have an effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. It's interesting that we've both reached the same point. Mine from a slightly different route. I was in UK in East Sussex, and I did a formal apprenticeship. I started rather late. Actually, I started when most guys were finishing. I didn't start mine until I was about 20. That was the age when most guys were finishing then. But I did my apprenticeship, and what I then did, I went to as soon as I qualified, I went off to America, and I went up to New Hampshire, worked with a farrier up there called Jim Smith, and it's the first time I'd seen pads being used. We'd use them occasionally in our business here, but up there in Granite State, well named, and you can understand why everything was pads. But pads were on every single horse, and we got good. And the majority of the work there was on Morgans and Saddlebreds. It was a big Morgan Saddlebred area, and everything was shod for those requirements of those different disciplines. What I then did, on my second year, I went down into Pennsylvania and worked with Steve Teekman. So a very talented farrier. In fact, he was the US farrier for, I think, 5 Olympics he did. So I knew Steve Teekman before he was Steve Teekman, and the horses there, mainly eventers, show jumpers, and dressage horses. And what I then did when I came back, I still had a good relationship with Steve. And when the American team were over in the UK, we'd meet up and go and shoe them. And he was using more and more glue on shoes. Some of the horses had some real desperate feet, you just had to keep them going. So that was my first entree, if you like, into glue on shoes. He'd arrive with a big bag of sound horse shoes, and we'd be put these on. They weren't readily available in the UK at that point, and that was my only time that I'd used them, was when Steve would come over. So we put a lot of these on, and they really saved a lot of horses' Olympics. Without them, some of those horses would just not have made it. But what Steve's whole raison d'etre was with his shoeing program for each of the horses was that he would make the shoeing as simple as possible, even if they had complex lameness issues that he had to overcome. He would keep the shoeing absolutely simple, because these horses would be competing across the world, and he wouldn't always be there. So he had
Yeah.
to find a simple fix that anyone in any country could just duplicate and copy, and the horses would continue to perform that level. And he just narrowed everything down. So he got rid of, if you like, what people would like to see in their shoeing job. So he got rid of all style and got down
Yeah.
to the absolute fundamentals. And how can he keep these horses performing in the most simple way? And so his shoeing was very simple but very, very effective, devoid of style. So um,
Yeah.
so he didn't say, "Oh no, every horse I shoe has to have a toe clip or a side clip." It's no.
Yeah.
He was very, very fluid in his
Yeah.
approach to the work, which I loved, and that's always something that I've done in the last 40 odd years at my shoe as well, is to have a very fluid approach. That it used to puzzle me why horse owners would insist on their horses being shod when I'd be resetting those same shoes in some cases year after year, and the only time we'd change them because the nail holes were getting so big you couldn't fit a nail in.
Yeah.
And you think, well, they're not wearing them out. Obviously, the rate of growth is faster than the rate of wear because we're not even wearing these shoes. I'm using them year after year. And
Yeah.
so I started to encourage my clients to leave the shoes off and save them money, if you like. And the horse didn't really need it, and there's no point putting holes in a horse's feet if it's unnecessary. And so bit by bit, I did less and less shoeing and more trimming.
Yeah.
I still had a very healthy shoeing business, but I only shod horses that really needed to be shod. And it's the most cost-effective way of keeping them sound. And this was just when I suppose there was a real increase in the amount of horse owners then investing in good riding surfaces. So up until
Yeah.
then, owners would do their bit of groundwork on the flattest bit of the field they could find. And then suddenly they were putting up new stables and they were getting a riding surface put in. Well, there's no point spending money on a riding surface and shoes. You
Exactly.
actually need one of those. You don't need both. And so,
Yeah.
and I think now in the UK, I think it would probably be impossible to get planning permission for stables without a menage. You know, um, so as long as the horses were being ridden and performing on a surface, it sort of negated the use of for shoes. So the only horses that I shoe now are ones that either need stud holes in because they're show jumping on grass and they need a bit of grip. Polo can be pretty tough on horses' feet, and we shoe those ones, but not all of them. And then I've got a couple of clients that actually do a fair bit of road work just because of where they live. The rest of them, the horses, I found that they're okay barefoot, but at certain times of the year, they actually need some other protection or some extra protection. And we tried the boot route, and that's very, very successful for some of the clients. But some of the fields, are so rough that they would actually need the boots on all the time. And I don't know whether
Yeah.
you found that, but sometimes it's not suitable to keep the horses in boots, 24/7. What's
Yeah.
your findings been on that?
I would tend to say that really ideally you don't want to boot on 24/7. If you're talking about something that's like a laminitic or something where you just got to have that stability along with getting the major lateral balance on the heel, so then they've got a stable platform even if it's a rough field, then, or a navicular case, then yeah, but then you're going to have them boots changed probably twice a day, and you're going to have to be meticulous about the management. So long as somebody's very, very meticulous, but let's face it, we're all human, we're all lazy, and we'll go like water down the stream to find the easiest route. And if we can avoid doing work, we will. So in a lot of circumstances, booting all the time isn't a good idea. A lot of the times when I've had laminitics or navicular cases or things like that, I tend to get them to go onto a level ground, make a stand paddock, put Harris fencing around, and have them on there until they get comfortable, and then they can scoop sand up or down to even up or level the feet and make themselves comfortable, which I find is even better. But again, it depends on the person's what's available to them. So you have to, when you decide not to shoe anymore, and you say, right, I'm going to go down this route and I'm going to make this work, then you have to try and get compliance with an awful lot of management protocols, and you have to get people to actually get the horse's feet engaged. One of the biggest thing I found that helps is a hardwire brush and cider vinegar and scrubbing the feet, exfoliating and stimulating the feet, and doing that daily. So, but the thing is, that's fine if you've got a good starting point. But if that sole is very, very thin or paper thin, and a sole shouldn't be, you shouldn't be able to put, you should be able to put some pressure on, and it shouldn't move. If that sole moves with that, you're in deep doo-doos.
Yeah.
And it's the same if the frog is weak and whittled away to nothing, it's like this and highly damaged, all in the back here, then it's not going to recover in 2 weeks. So we do need something more than boots, because sometimes with affected back of the foot, you put a boot on and strap it up behind. That pressure behind, some of the won't take that on the feet. So sometimes boots won't work. A lot of the times they do, and the great sometimes the glue on shoes and things I've seen people do and use. But the problem that has a problem as well, because you permanently lifted that foot.
Yeah.
And if you permanently lift the foot, you then affect the way the horse moves, the dynamics, as it were. And if that's doing, then how the muscles move, how the nutrients flow around the body, everything gets affected. It may only be with some horses in small amounts, and then you have to wait. Should I do this? Should I do that? Which is the best way to do? So then when I first saw you doing your glue-ons, I thought, well, there's the chap. I know Mark Sanchez in Spain, who's a top farrier there, who's a teaching farrier, and he was going down the route of trying to find something to just paste on and glue on ages ago. And he went through so many different things, and I dare say you must have gone through huge amounts of glue and different things. Your hands will be full of all sorts of stuff, but it's an exploration really, because it's still relatively new in the whole scheme of things.
Yeah, it is actually. That although other industries employ the use of glues massively, for some reason, farriery, there seems to be a bit of not a push against it, but a reluctance to embrace it, shall we say. In fact, when I do my Let's Get Glue in CPD days, CPD events, I always start with the question of, besides me, has anyone else had any problem with glues? And everyone just hands up. I said, how many people drove here? And all the hands go up. And how many people broke the speed limit? Yeah. Okay. And yet every car has got at least 15 kilos of glue in it, holding it together.
Yeah.
And I dare say that car is more than 6 weeks old. So cars can embrace many different types of glues. I mean, so many glues in a car, it's unbelievable. And yet all we have to do as farriers is to develop some skills and some knowledge to keep something on the foot for 6 weeks. That's it.
Yeah.
And we're into the next cycle.
Yeah.
And
maybe not even that long, depends on the horse and the rate of movement and everything else,
Absolutely. So how I came to develop sort of just putting glue on the soles was back 2010, I developed Glue Shoot, which is my baby.
Yeah.
That's one we just sort of ground the ground surface off so you can see what's inside. And to put this on, I was just putting glue on this surface here first. You can see that on that foot surface, holding that onto the foot, and then filling up the gap that we'd normally leave so there's no sole pressure. But I was so
Yeah.
concerned with mud getting underneath there and affecting the gluing that I used to fill all that space up. And then it looked so untidy, I would get my thumb and spread that glue around the sole just to make it
Right.
look a bit tidier.
Yeah.
And there's one particular horse I was doing this on, and it was such a flat foot. It was extraordinarily flat and lame. And we put these on, we'd leave them on for as long as we could. So 6, 7 weeks, 8 weeks sometimes. And then I'd come, take the shoe off, and I found that I had all this sole. So there's masses of sole. And so suddenly I'm cleaning out all this sole, and the sole is really, really cupped. I think it was. I'm sure it was flat when I put these on, and so I just kept doing it, and then that then became my procedure when I was putting these on, is that I would move that glue across the sole, and every time I was putting these onto flat-footed horses, I was then finding all this sole there, and obviously it wasn't exfoliating and the rest of it, but it wasn't just that; the whole foot was changing shape.
Yeah. I will. Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought, well, do I actually need the shoe? No, let's see if we can do this just with the adhesive, whether it's the covering the sole. And what I found I was replicating was when horses go through mud or soil and it gets impacted in the foot and it develop something like, looks a bit like that. Just this massive soil and stuff that actually came off a foot. But it's just mud. It's impacted in, and all those feet seem to be okay. You rarely get any thrush in them or whatever. You sometimes do, but more often than not. But that's all I was doing. So those horses, once I had a covering on the sole, they were galloping over everything. I thought, well, that's what I want to do, is to replicate that. And it's interesting what you said about the husbandry side of things. It's so important to get people to buy into what you're doing, so you work together as a team.
Yeah.
And where I am in the UK, and I've seen this, Esco Buff in the States coined this expression, retracted sole, where you pick the foot up and it looks as though the sole's just been sucked in, but it's not that. It's just that the ground hits a certain amount of slurriness that it acts like a big grinding pace and grinds out that sole. And then you are left with the sole. You just press it with your thumb, and these soles are just flexing, and the horses are pretty lame. And
it's the same.
Yeah,
I was going to say it's the same thing happens in with the Cytex shoe or keyhole shoes, and they get at a certain stage, because they usually stay on for weeks and weeks because the horse wears on that taut. But underneath, if it's sort of like after a few weeks and the shoe comes loose or for whatever reason, which occasionally happened, then you'd find that it actually scooped, the soil had scooped and thinned the whole sole out just in the same way. So when I saw that first, I thought, bloody hell, these shoes are shit. And then I realised it was actually waiting to, once it had back on and it compacted in and it had that compaction, then it had something to push against. So it was just like, it was a start of something. So at the very start of things, it had that detrimental effect, but then once it had that pack in against it, so it had something to push against. It's a little bit like having that hoof wall. If that hoof wall is there and the sole has got that to push against, so you have this wall to push that sole here against it, it's got that to work against. So if you're putting something strong here, you're giving it something as it presses down, a pad, as you say. And when you're talking about the mud and the pad effect there, the thing that a lot of people say, oh, but glue, it's going to stop that breathing of that foot, that heat exchange. But then again, when you get that clay bit like you got there, it comes out really dry and hard because that heat from that hoof has heated it up and dried it, but it's giving it something solid to work against.
Yeah, I find that when you're in arid countries, hot arid countries, the feet are generally more narrow. You're looking at donkeys or Arab feet that are generally narrow. Yeah. And when you come to Europe, so in those countries, if you put a shoe on, the shoe is covering a huge percentage of that sole.
Yeah.
but when you come to Europe and you've got a foot that's 6 inches wide, you can't bend a piece of metal that's 3 inches wide to cover the sole. So what
No.
we've done is we've gone for a narrower section of material that we can bend, and we've just made it taller. So we've made it sort of narrower here, but
Mm.
taller, just so
Mm.
we can bend it and it can afford the protection. But then what happens is everything falls through the middle because
Yeah,
there's nothing holding it
exactly.
up.
Yeah.
And then almost perversely wrong, if you like, is that we encourage people to pick the horse's feet out. And so
Yeah.
there's no packing. And so it
Yeah.
leads to the question is, should you say to horse owners, just don't touch their feet unless they're lame because they might have a rock in there or something. So should we discourage them picking feet out because there's nothing holding that foot up and filling that void? I know that's probably a question for
Yeah.
another day, but it's an
Yeah.
interesting scenario. But certainly on those thin-soled horses where the sole has been scoured out, um, when you X-ray them, there's only a few mil between
Yeah.
sensitive parts of the foot and the actual horny sole. So if you then just put a thin layer of glue on that's a couple of mil, you've already doubled the thickness of that
Yeah.
sole, and the horses are generally very thankful for it. Pretty much in the same way that for us to negotiate a stony driveway, impossible barefoot, but we only need a pair of socks on and we can walk over it okay. So we don't need a lot of extra. And I think that sometimes people think that if a horse is really lame, it needs a really lot of stuff on it. And sometimes
Yeah.
you just need just a little bit of protection.
Yeah. So that's like with like the hoof armor as an example. It
Mm,
gets so thin,
mm,
but it stops the moisture going in through and gives that layer a little bit more strength or hardness or toughness, let's say. Now, obviously, from my point of view, I'd want to see that toughness being built up and built in over a period of time through management, working, and everything else. But we have to then think, well, not everyone is going to comply with that. But we want all these people to be on board. We have to solve their issues and problems because, I don't want to, I want to get rid of nailed on metal shoes. That's my aim in life. Now, I've spoken to other farriers or had chats with them where they're in certain states they're running over rocks, so this is impossible. Then I can show them barefooted horses in the Karoo or other places where they're just galloping and they're doing endurance races high end and no problem, just barefoot, no boots, no nothing. It's all possible, but it's making that way to it possible. And I think the way you work is extremely useful for bringing these worlds together because we need eventually to start looking at how horses are raised and brought up
mm.
so we don't have all these domesticated issues that we create for ourselves
Yeah,
and then we're firefighting for the
yeah.
rest of their lives.
Yeah, yeah, I'm totally on board with that. A lot of the situations as I come across are husbandry rather than anything
Yeah,
else. It's how the not what the horse is doing or whatever. It's everything about the welfare of the horse, how it's being used, and I suppose that every horse, over the last few million years, it's found its way around to find some food. But when we say you will go over this ground at this speed that I will determine, and also you'll carry me, then we sometimes have to make up for those demands. And sometimes those demands that the horse can't readily do if they're unprepared. And I think as farriers and I say hoof care professionals,
yeah,
we need to look at ways that we can prepare the horse for those demands.
yeah,
And I think in some ways, you know what? The worst thing that's ever happened to farriery is sharp knives. There's a plethora
yeah,
of really, really amazing, sharp, good quality knives that the whole industry seems to be hell bent on using to their full effect. So you'll see guys, cleaning out a sole and then replacing it with a pad. Um,
yeah,
so it's it's
It's almost insane, isn't it, really?
well, it is. But sometimes the only pictures that get onto Facebook are the ones at a, let's say, a shoeing contest where the foot is prepared to within an inch of its life, and it only has to
Yeah,
be good for 10 minutes because that's the judging. You think, well, how suitable is that for that horse?
yeah,
And I have huge problems with that. I like the idea of having a craft where we retain some hand skills because the more hand skills or the more times we use our hands, the better we are at doing our job. But it's then having the choice of what we use those hand skills for. And I don't think that
mm.
making shoes necessarily is a good use of those skills. I think there's other
No,
skills that we can develop. In the same way that a surgeon would now use super glues,
yeah,
medicated ones, instead of using those suture skills. Both are,
yeah,
their place, but they've embraced something alongside what they do. So there's times
yeah.
when they will use some glues, and there's times when they will get a needle and thread and stitch it together. But I think we need to, it comes back to what we said at the beginning. We need to keep fluid in our approach and do what's appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that I've been developing over the last several years is work with hoofwear patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And because the reason I did it is because of COVID that came up, and I was thinking, well, I've got to go out and help people. I've got to keep them up. I've got to keep doing. And I was in a van traveling around, so I was very isolated and very safe and all that sort of thing. Um, but one of my ex-clients turned around and said, you always say about what hoofwear patterns, but you've never explained it. And I thought, well, it's too simple. Everyone knows this. So I explained what I did and what I look for when I'm looking at hooves. And she said, oh, I've never heard this before anywhere. So I thought, okay, I better start teaching this and doing it. So that's what I've done. So we take the hooves and we evaluate every single hoof, then put them together. And there's loads of it on my website and everything else about it. Or we can do something more at a later date. But basically, you're looking at all 4 feet, but you're looking at things that on the hoof that occur that is a block to movement. Now, just as a quick one, we did a year-long training program with people from different schools and brought them through with 22 horses, all ex-riding school horses. All the management, everything else was the same for all the horses, and they all had big problems and issues and joint issues and laminitis and navicular, all sorts of things. And all the trimmers, they're all from sort of different backgrounds, different ideas. We weren't there to teach them trimming, right? We're there to teach them hoofwear patterns. And we set out how to make the schematic using the hooves, how to turn the horse on a tight circle left and right, and then said, right, these are your horses. You have two each. There's 11 of them, and you go through for a whole year. We keep every 8 weeks, come back, and we do this. It was together. I ran this with Barbara Hoekstra, who made this little booklet here for me
Oh, that's cool.
for the actual for that particular training, and she's got a really good strong background in bodywork and training, and also for humans. So anyway, um, at the end of that year, all of them were trimming more or less the same way
Wow.
without without me telling
That
them. And
teaching tribute.
so
Yeah.
yeah, the horses were the ones going, no, that's blocking me. And so they mark the blocks on the horse and then they come back and the blocks would just change. Everything would just gradually change. So you take away a little block, and then the next time they come, that block would be less, but then the wear pattern would change because they're wearing something slightly different else on the foot.
Wow.
So they just went with what the horse was doing. And it was a way they could see it and validate it. And then they were taking it but to their own clients, because these are all working people, taking to their clients and making schematics of to their horses, to their own clients' horses, and going, hey, this is how your horse is moving. This is what it's feeling. So when you're riding this, this is what's happening. Oh yeah, that's why it can't go to the right or can't take off and canter this way, because it's feeling this. And so it was a really strong way of validating it. So for me, there's so many different skills of what we take this off, take that off. we should be listening to the horse. And what you were saying just before, this is what got me started on it, is this thing of feeling. Every single student, I told them to close their eyes and feel around the hooves, as well as measure them and assess them and do that. But they had to feel everything. I make notes, feel over the whole body of the horse for lumps, bumps, everything. So we have to look at the whole picture.
Yeah.
And when we've got broken down horses, you know, they each single horse has its own set of issues and problems. They're all special.
Yeah.
You know, every owner, as you know, has their own special horse, right? And they are all special, but they all have their own special. But it's stuff that we always come across.
Yeah.
Every single country we go to, we
Yeah.
come across the same problems, same issues.
Yeah. I agree.
And so, unless we change the very beginning, and if anyone wants a good book on that, there's Gudrun Bookoffer, who's made a series of 3 books about from full to full grown. I can't remember what the name of the book is, but look at the Gudrun Bookoffer. So the good books.
Okay.
But anyway,
right. So
I digress.
on that, I think we need to start to round up here because Zoom gives us 43 minutes.
Okay.
After that, we have to start paying for subscriptions. So we've got 43 minutes, so we've got a couple of minutes left.
Okay.
And in those few minutes, I'd just like to thank you for coming along. Well, not you coming along, you know, is your idea when you said, should we do a podcast? Here I am, bulldozing my way into running it.
No, not at all. I'm really glad this is exactly what we should be doing more of.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think we should ask people for if they've got questions they would like us to discuss and talk about.
That's a great idea. Email or text some questions in, and then we'll cover those in the next podcast.
Yeah, and I think we'll do this on a regular basis and just throw it around because it's just live. It's straight out of our mouths as we're thinking. We're not preparing anything, but you know that's how it should be instead of all this AI generated stuff that we don't know if it's real or not. Yeah.
Well, the thing is that often, well, always, we have to perform live in front of clients, and it would be just rude for us to prepare. And then, you know, something that the viewers or the listeners aren't able to do. You know, they have to go and perform live in front of people, their clients.
Yeah.
So I think that we should just do the same. So this is you know, live and unedited, unabridged or whatever. But it's cool, just to sit down and have an answer. But that's that. Now, I don't know how this ends, whether it just suddenly stops or whether they say it's not now. So, so we spent 40 years learning about farriery, and we've got to spend a little bit of time learning about Zoom now. So we can do that. So we'll just natter inanely.
Well, I'll say very quickly. One is because I run barefoot as well, but because I've picked up the speed more, I also use 5 fingers. So I'm like you were saying. I adapt by putting on something on my feet if I'm going over sharper stones faster.
Oh, that's right.
I have to protect it, you know. So, but when I'm going steadier, I take them off and run barefoot over rocks and stuff, but not over sharp stones.
Yeah.
So we have to be fluid how we think. We have our experiences of when we've travelled in different countries and everywhere else. And we have to bring that to the table and go.
That's so interesting because I do 2 sports. I do judo and badminton. Badminton, I've got my badminton trainers or plimsolls, as I like to call them. And then judo is barefoot.
Yeah.
So I do keep fluid there. Both sports that I enjoy doing. One barefoot, trainers on.
Yeah, so this is really good though because we bring it back to humans as well.
Yeah,
what we know and understand about the horses, we can bring back into our own lives.
Absolutely.
So, and I know before we talked about lots of different things before we came on here, but there's so many different subjects about weight loss, weight gain, optimum weights, like we were saying about birds of prey, you know, things like this. Loads of questions for people to ask, and we can just. Yeah, we can just do this as often as we've got time to, really.
Yeah. Well, look, that's now coming up to 40 minutes, and Zoom still hasn't